This is Theology for the Unwanted. I am your co-host, John Byram, and I am joined by the host and author of the upcoming book, Theology for the Unwanted, Daniel Tilson.
What is going on?
This is weird.
This is trademark violation? I don't know.
I don't think it's a trademark violation. I feel like I'm about to interview you about your upcoming book today.
That's true. And we are trying to show people that the church and sometimes even its podcasters are capable of trying something different.
It's not the first time I've hosted a podcast, but I like where your head's at.
Fair.
As always, before we start our amazing episodes, sir, we like to have a little friendly banter a little bit. Was there anything you did in your week leading up to tonight's recording that you want to talk about? Something fun?
This is really strange. Okay. Anyway.
Now you know how I feel.
Did I say, hey, I'm Dan Tilson, by the way, or did you take care of that?
I said you're Dan Tilson.
Okay,
I don't think you gave the proper John response, but it's fine. I understand being a co-host is new for you. So it's fine.
Well, actually, as part of my day job, I put on town halls for members of Congress around the country. And today I did an online one and totally forgot to say my name. Quite frankly, I don't think a single voter cared. But anyway, they were listening to me for 45 minutes without knowing who the heck I was.
There you go.
How about you?
I think the only thing I can really think about is this ongoing saga I've had for the past month. A lot of discernment, a lot of thoughtful prayer went into a very big decision in my life. And also I trusted a lot of good friends. I had an opportunity to make a move in my professional career and was kind of at an impasse. And I spoke to my trusted circle, my chosen family, my close friends, Dan included. You had to hear a brunt of it, so I do apologize to you.
I've been upgraded to close friend.
You stole that from me from earlier. I don't want to hear it from about. Anywho, but yeah, so I had to make a very tough decision to turn down a promotion because it just wasn't the right fit for me, and it was very tough to do. But I feel like it was the right choice, and I felt very relieved by that. So the one thing I'd like to push from that takeaway is trust your gut, trust your friends, your close friends that won't steer you wrong, hopefully. Dan, I'm looking at you. and yeah, and if the decision feels right after you've made it, if you feel like you have that pressure relief off of your chest, off of your shoulders, probably made the right decision.
That's true. Do you remember any of the advice that I gave you?
No, of course I remember the advice I gave you. No, I mean, your biggest thing was the one message that hit home constantly from you was I need to start looking out for myself. Mm-hmm. And I think you're right. And I think sometimes looking out...
That's not how I put it.
That's not how you put it.
I believe... I'm sorry. No, stand back while I describe it.
My apologies.
I believe I told you that you have a delightfully well-established pattern of allowing other people to go in front of you, even when it's something that you need to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right. And sometimes that means putting myself first in the sense of realizing if I was to take this position, I would not be happy. I would not have been in a good place.
I do agree. I think you made exactly the right choice for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think it's the first time you've ever told me that.
Oh,
that feels good. I appreciate that. You know what? I needed that. I needed that. Much like a lot of people are going to love to have this book and need this book, I hope.
Well, before we go into that, I just want to establish myself as a very close friend. Do you remember that
super close friend?
Yeah. Do you remember that car commercial maybe 4 years ago? It was like the J.D. Power Most Dependable Car Award.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't exactly remember if it was like a Toyota or a Hyundai or just, I don't remember what.
It definitely was not a Hyundai.
Okay. Well, that commercial was on every 5 seconds. Didn't matter if you were watching the World Series, if you were watching RuPaul, it was on. And as you know from our friend Brandon, we had this mutual friend who was jealous of me and Brandon being best friends. And he said, oh, if that award was something that you would give to friends, then you would give it to Brandon and he would just give it back to you. And I'd be stuck here with nothing. So for his birthday, we took the commercial and we took the J.D. Power trophy and we basically had a replica made of it, but it said Most Dependable Friend Award. And then Brandon and I jointly gave it to this one friend who always felt left out.
I'm blanking on who that friend was, but it wasn't me, obviously, because I didn't get that award.
You're in the running for next year, the 2026.
The 2026 Dependable Friend Award. I like it. We have a very exciting topic on today's podcast. You have a book that, funny enough, this podcast is named after coming up that is going to be released very, very soon. Can we announce the release date of this?
Oh, 100%.
100%. I believe it's available right now for pre-order on such marketplaces as Amazon.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Actually, it was put on Amazon late last night, and I discovered it. Don't check your messages right before bed.
Guilty.
Right. Well, there was a notice and I clicked on it and I was so excited. It was very hard to fall asleep last night because I've been working on this for years. And in the process, have been sitting down with, this is not an exaggeration, hundreds of individuals who have said, hey, I need to get a coffee with you and talk through what's going on in my life and my struggles with the church. And I don't feel like I know that many people. I'm just talking about the people I've met with locally.
Yeah.
And so the whole point was we had to get a book, something that I could get into the hands of people that I don't have the capability to sit down for a coffee with. So here we are.
Or you can just fly to the DC area. I'm pretty sure you'd love to take them to the local Starbucks or something crazy like that, or one of the bajillion different coffee shops or startups or whatever we have in this area.
I really wish that I had a push pin map of all of the coffee shops where I have had lengthy conversation with individuals about their struggles in the church, because I would have most of the DMV lit up.
I believe it. I believe it. So obviously you have the book coming out. I believe it's being released December 2nd is the date I saw on Amazon.
Yes.
It's available for pre-order on theologyfortheunwanted.com as well. So make sure you check that out on Amazon and the website for your pre-order opportunities. That's very exciting. But Dan, I think the purpose of today's podcast that we discussed prior to pressing the record button is we kind of want to give people that look inside, not just of you, the author, but what they can expect of this book that is going to be so impactful for so many people, hopefully worldwide, to help not just revitalize themselves, revitalize their faith, and hopefully revitalize the church going forward. So I want to start all the way back in the beginning. I want to talk day one. I'm not talking like your actual birthday. I'm not talking
1991.
1990, the 1900s?
George H.W. Bush was president.
Oh my goodness. I won't even say who was president.
The Gulf War was ending.
Anywho,
for you, it was starting.
It was. So Dan, I want to know about early Dan. What was a young Dan Tilson like before he evolved into the liturgic geek I had the honor to meet in college?
I was always very interested in making sure I had the approval of adults, of the priests at my parish. I was very, very ambitious, and I think I volunteered for a lot of things. So in that regard, nothing has changed. But I was deeply involved in my church, and I was deeply involved in politics. And I thought that those two things went hand in hand, that there had to be like no daylight between them, that they were, the same mission. And yeah, here we are.
And I think the weird dynamic, or unique dynamic, I should say, is it's very prominent in the area that you grew up in, here in the Washington, D.C. area, in the suburbs inside the city, and just the diverse community we have in this region. So you have this passion for your faith. You have this passion for politics. What was that like growing up as a young Catholic in this area where you thought they both went hand in hand? Obviously, we don't want to spoil the rest of the way here, but what was that like for you growing up in that situation where you thought they were hand in hand?
So looking back, there was always this sense of loss that was kind of built into the homilies at church and built into your prayer life. I think back to the gospel recently with the Pharisee standing and, thank you, God, for not making me like that tax collector behind me. A theologian reads that story and immediately understands that the Pharisee, not a bad dude. In fact, Jesus had friends who were Pharisees. The Pharisee, in fact, is trying harder than everyone else. He's trying harder to preserve the system that upheld God's favor for the community, that upheld the purity and the safety of the community as a kind of like a psychological fortress, upheld the tradition of a people who were constantly on the move. That same phenomenon that you see with the Pharisees in Luke and Matthew played out, but in, a post-Vatican II way. We always talk about that pendulum swinging, right? Well, it was coming back hard where I grew up in favor of tradition and all the things that we had lost. And so church on Sundays was in Latin. It was a Novus Ordo.
Mhm.
So that is what you would think of as like the modern mass, but it was in Latin. And I think we were often taught that we had to try because the rest of the Catholics around the world weren't trying. And if they weren't trying, if we were reduced to just 12, that we would be the good ones that kept this going. And that's not inherently bad. It just wasn't Catholic theology. It was more about almost seeing Catholicism in the same way that many ethnic groups see themselves and try and maintain their tradition and pass them on. These are good things. These are people who are trying. I was trying, but I wasn't really living my faith in the way that I am now trying to.
You grew up in a very traditional conservative household here in the DMV area. What was that like?
Well, I loved working on campaigns. I mean, fun fact. I mean, you probably know this.
Oh, I know. I know where you're going with this too.
Whoa, what? Go ahead.
No, I don't want to spoil this. I want to hear it in your own words.
So Guinness, the
Yes.
world records, they offered me a contract when I was in high school. I'm not even sure if that's the right word. It may have been like a contract to investigate the situation. But there was at least some reason to think that I was the youngest campaign manager for our federal campaign in history at age, I believe, 15. I was crazy ambitious as a kid. And I really I had my vision of what a perfect world should be like. And I was on a mission and you weren't going to stop me. And being conservative meant preserving the values that I had been told, not discovering the values for myself and then living them out because I am organically doing that. But it was more important to me that I almost like pass them on, like passing a torch. And that was that was my purpose. In high school, I was the guy that was always campaigning, like 80 hours a week.
So now that we have a base understanding of young Dan Tilson, we're going to fast forward a little bit later into life. Obviously, the crux of this book has to deal with LGBT Catholics. At a point, you were struggling with sexuality and growing up in a conservative American diocese. Walk me through a little bit what that dynamic was like for you personally.
Sure. I remember our college chaplain, who's a really, really good dude. And when I met up with him maybe a year ago to kind of talk through everything that happened over the past 10 years, he and I had traveled together internationally. We had traveled on pilgrimage as a group to the Holy Land. We had gone to Rome together, and then we had traveled in Italy outside of that. And he was like, man, I really thought that I knew you. And it hurt a little bit. But you know what? I realized I also thought that I knew me. I was also talking with a high school friend that I had gone 5 years without seeing. And, I felt so awkward coming out to him at first because I was like, he's going to think that I had a huge crush on him in high school. But you know what? I think back to those times and I don't think I understood my feelings. I don't think I understood my desires because the church had told me that sexual orientation is a choice. It's not something that exists. That's what they would say. I mean, can you imagine if they're like, sexual orientation doesn't exist? And if it didn't exist, then I didn't have it. And so I kind of recognized in the background somewhere, there were these weird feelings that I think I kind of justified in different ways. But I don't think I really understood for quite some time that they were feelings that would drive me towards love. I think I dismissed them as temptations and I just kind of assumed that everybody has them in different ways. But I didn't think that it was different from anyone. And so, in many ways, my blind faith, relying on what I had been told by my priests, it really stunted my growth because I I wasn't able to process what I was feeling. And it took me a really long time to understand that I was a little bit different. It takes everyone who comes out a different amount of time to process that. I think a lot of us have that same feeling. I don't know. But it takes different people different amount of time to process that. And that is one thing that I hope people can get from this book, is to basically say, okay, I have these feelings. What is it for? What do I do with them? Or I'm not in compliance with the church rules and I can't easily get in compliance with the church rules. So what do I do with it?
So here we are, you're late high school into college life. You are having this internal struggle with your sexuality in compliance with your faith. But then you also get a very unique experience. I think that a lot of people, I know I was slightly jealous of. I know it's a little bit of a sin to say that, but I think it's a very cool experience that you had. And that is you getting to intern for the Vatican. A very unique experience, allowing you a very unique perspective of the church. Talk to me a little bit about that internship and what that experience was like and what that did to you.
That was a good year.
That
was a good year. Okay, we have to back up just a little bit here. I didn't like the church that I was at, the church where Mass was in Latin. I was having bad experiences. I thought it was hyper negative. I thought it was extremely political. And by the time I was 18, I was starting to wonder, like, is this really what God wants for us, to like have to sit through this every Sunday? Because I was told that he loves us. And this, sometimes, quite frankly, the things I hear from the pulpit just feels really rude. I had a friend who was a aspiring diplomat from Singapore, and I brought him to Mass with me one Sunday. And of course, the homily was like, Buddhists are bad.
Of course.
And, there was just, it got to a point where I was almost embarrassed, almost ashamed, right? Because I am trying to share my faith, even though in some ways I'm not feeling welcome myself. And the priests, plural, do not have our back. So I'd always assumed, I think everyone assumes, that your parish is exactly what Catholicism is like everywhere. In high school, I had studied Italian, and I was ready to give up on my faith. And coincidentally, somebody said, hey, there's an Italian language church. You want to go check it out? You want to go try it out? And I was like, nah, not really. And he was like, just why not? God works through invitations. So I did. And I have been there since 2009. It is because I was there without any sort of like preconceived notion of why I was going there. I was basically just trying to survive in my faith and wasn't really expecting to make it much longer. Because I was at the Italian language parish, there were different Vatican officials that would constantly visit. And so slowly, I moved from this idea of a bishop as someone like, you back out of the way, kind of like a colonel in the military coming down the hallway, like, get out of his way. I moved from that idea to understanding this person has the role of a shepherd, and that every bishop has different, unique set of challenges. In other words, the Italian parish opened me up to a totally different form of Catholicism, totally different. And one Christmas Eve, I was the altar boy, and we happened to have an archbishop. And he said, we were talking through my major, which was international conflict. And he goes, Daniele, why don't you come a worker for me?
I love your accent when you do that. It cracks me up every time.
I've had many years of practice. And I remember telling my parents that, oh, he's at the Vatican embassy in Genoa, which doesn't make sense, by the way, but I didn't know. And so as I was getting ready to book the ticket, that's when I realized that the embassy was in Geneva, Switzerland. I got to see the church up close, the very universal nature of the church. We always talk about the four marks of the church, Catholic being one of them, universal. And to literally be at a table where we would have to vote on the official language for every staff meeting, it really opened me up to that meaning in a way that I wasn't capable of seeing in my hometown.
You now have this new, unique outlook on the church through this experience with interning with the Vatican, with this internship. So you have your upbringing in a conservative family, conservative politics, in a conservative American diocese. Then you have this global experience of the church. You have this almost out-of-body experience, if you will, with the rest of the church, with the church's body. And having known you, I feel like this kind of rekindled your faith a bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now I want to fast forward to another challenging time, maybe another moment where questions were popping up. And that's when not only you came to terms with yourself, but when you started to be vulnerable with other people and starting to tell them. So essentially your coming out story. And I remember when you came out to me.
Mm.
And honestly, one, I thought someone died when you came and told me that you needed to come talk to me.
We were at a DC United game.
It was the invitation to the DC United game.
Oh, okay.
And I could tell there was something on your mind the entire 90 minutes. And it wasn't how bad DC United was playing on the pitch. I remember we walked back to the car afterwards. We sat in the car and you said, I have something I need to tell you. And you told me. Do you remember my reaction?
It's weird because as you're saying this, I'm reliving some of the physical tension in my chest.
Sorry.
And maybe my shoulders felt really tight there and I got a little shaky. Yeah, you said, I am an ally, I support you.
And I gave you a hug.
And you gave me a hug.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you're the same old Dan that I've known since day one when we met. But I understand, not just through you, but through other friends who have gone through the experience as well, that that's not always the experience people have when they come out to their friends, when they come out to their family. What was that experience like for you? And how did that impact you going forward?
It was a traumatic year, very traumatic several years, actually, which is why I always tell people share your stories, but do it at your own pace. I literally had a list, which I have. Everyone has a memory box, like the trophies they got in third grade soccer for participation, not for scoring goals. I have a memory box, and in there is a list of everybody that I had a coming out conversation with. Except at the time, they weren't like mini trophies, like, yes, another conversation down. I had a list because I literally, in my mind, at every day, at every point, had to be able to remind myself, had I come out to that person, if we're hanging out with this person and that person, do both people know? Or do I need to get ahead of that? Or do I need to be prepared and just accept that this might not come out on my terms? Every moment of every day was in some way calculated the same way that a politician would calculate their media appearances. Being very vulnerable for a quick second, I started really formally coming out to people in 2018. There were two things that neither are in this book. I think this conversation here is really setting up people for the things that they can discover in the book, and that we're not like giving away lots of things in there. But two things in 2018. One was my best friend left for the army. And I know, I don't think I've shared this with him. There was no sexual attraction to my best friend, but there was this sort of intimacy. I have been seen by another person. They understand me. In some ways, I felt like we were so close as friends that we were almost sharing a life, not in the way that a married couple does, but like we were sharing a life. And I just felt like I had that non-sexual partner that I needed. And when he left for the military, I was grieving. And then I think I'm getting my timeline correct here. Very shortly thereafter, Cardinal McCarrick, who became Mr. McCarrick because he had been abusing so many people. That's when we found out that basically a bishop who was not far from where I lived, who had said mass at my parish, whom I had talked to many times, who I knew was recruiting people to the priesthood in DC, as any bishop would, but he was like every third man that he saw was like, you need to be a priest. We had always thought over the prior 15 years that the sex abuse scandal was limited to just your local priest. But then we found out, starting with McCarrick, that it's actually a pretty substantial number among the bishops as well. And that was devastating. And so trying to grapple with those two things, I remember not going to communion for almost all that year. I was so angry with God. I would go to Eucharistic adoration and just feel disgusted with myself and disgusted with the church. And it was so much pain to carry. And that's when I began the list of telling people one by one. So
I think you're spot on, right? So you had that reaction of coming out to your friends, of making that list, your experience with what was going on in the church, and that's what really drove you to start that process going forward. And I guess that brings me to my next question here. Obviously, the church provides us guidance, not just in our faith life, but in our mortal life here on earth as well. It seems like there's a fine line between laws and rules within the church. How does one really try to navigate that when you feel like maybe there's not a place for you in church?
that is the heart of the question for anyone that is in an English-speaking country to a lesser extent than us. Like Ireland and the UK, yes, they have this problem. No one is quite as polarized in the Catholic Church as us. I talk about this in depth in the book, and I always want to be careful not to diminish the importance of having canon lawyers and having discipline and having rules. We don't have rules for rules' sake. There has to be a theology behind it. And unfortunately, I do believe that a majority of the priests who have gone to an American seminary and even gone to an American seminary in Rome just have this understanding that is divergent, quite frankly, in its framework from what most of the church has. The two extremes of the Catholic Church are the United States and Germany, in my opinion. In the United States, we are so hyper-focused on rules, on boundaries, on keeping the family together, just like the Pharisee. It's for a good purpose. We're trying harder than most. And we look at the other extreme, Germany, where everyone is a theologian. Everyone is on their journey. They're discovering God, and we judge them over there because they're so lackadaisical in the way that they follow prescriptions and rules and order that to us it looks messy. And we also look at the way that church is just not really an important part of society and culture over there the way that it used to be. Again, we're capitalizing on that sense of loss within us, and we have to prevent that loss that you see in Germany. Most of the church, thankfully, is not the United States or Germany. Most of the Catholic Church is able to find some balance that makes sense for who they are, for what they're facing. Because what's the point? What's the whole point of Catholicism? Why be Catholic? What's the end goal?
Obviously, heaven is what I would assume. Like I kind of want to go to the club in the sky.
The club in the sky. Does my new United Airlines credit card get me points for that club?
Do Sky Miles count? I don't know. Maybe Star Alliance benefits.
Okay, well,
there you go.
Yeah, I'm looking for the divine benefits.
The divine benefits. There we go.
I guess I would look at it this way. If I'm thinking of the church in two different ways, you have the discipline wing and you have the theology wing. The discipline it's like the recipes. It's like the recipes, like you're trying to cook something with at home, and you have these ingredients in front of you, and you kind of take that for granted because you get these same ingredients at the store every single week. But you're looking for a recipe, something that's tried and true. The ingredients, these are the things that theology cares about. You and I are created by God. In a way, we're like an ingredient making up nature as He intended it. We're ingredients. I think back to the way chocolate was made 2 centuries ago. Did you know that it was acidic? It wasn't quite like orange juice, but it was highly acidic.
I believe it.
Okay. We didn't have enough knowledge yet of food science to understand how to make it this sweet, milky, like you think with Hershey chocolate. We didn't have that capability back then in food processing. And so recipes do change. They change when you go from rubbing the sticks together to get the wood on fire to the hearth to the electric stove. Recipes frickin' change.
Yeah.
Okay. But sometimes it's because we understand the ingredients better as well. And that is what theology is trying to grapple with.
So if recipes change, my question then is, does church teachings ever change?
What do you think?
I would like to think the teachings don't change, but they're
No, this is good. Like, because I think most people are going to say that church teachings cannot change, have never changed. They always have been.
They can change, but it's not change in the sense of the message. It's how we get there, right? So it's like chocolate. The end product is still chocolate, but the recipe changed from that acidic base to a sweet base because of that food science, because of the discovery of different additions that they can make it. The outcome is still the same, but there's a different way of getting there. So the church has teachings, but maybe the way of getting there isn't as clear cut as we thought.
That's fair. I mean, and there's this tension again between, was it the rule that changed or was it the theology that changed? They both change. They don't change in the theology doesn't change in the eternal sense.
Correct.
Right. But it does change from, I find it so silly and almost dishonest when a catechist is someone who's teaching church theology to an 8th grader and they're like, it cannot change. It never changes. And then I'll be like, well, it can change. And they'll be like, well, yeah, but like in the divine and the gods, okay, but we're not God. So from our perspective and the way that we are explaining it, it is intellectually dishonest to say that it does not change. I guess here's some quick examples. The church used to teach that slavery was a possibility in nature. Like you could, through nature, be born a slave. And we weren't saying that you had to have a slave, that slavery was good. In fact, many popes through many centuries were like, slavery is bad, but it's in nature, you know? And I think over time we came to realize that we were taking a cultural norm that humans had invented and we had projected that onto nature, right? So eventually, well after the United States got rid of its slavery and responding to an issue in South America, Pope Leo the 13th came out and said, one is not born a slave in nature. That is not a thing. Stop your silliness. And you know what? People were like, no, the church cannot change. You can be born a slave. No, that is human culture. So we try and understand the ingredients better, right? And so that, but we have to be honest, that was a change. One day, somebody woke up and it was suddenly no longer possible to be born a slave in nature according to the Catholic Church. That's a major freaking change. Another maybe silly example that's helpful, the way the church emphasizes things changes throughout the centuries. There were approximately 3 centuries where the number one sin the Catholic Church was harping against as a like universal body was lending money with interest. Can you imagine that?
I would love for the church to take a stance against that. I don't want any more interest on any of my loans or credit cards or anything.
It's so funny you say that because Pope Leo did come out. The name of the sin, by the way, is usury. And Pope Leo came out and spoke against that, like the current Pope Leo, only a couple weeks ago. But here's the thing, our understanding of it is different. In the old economy, before we kind of got to this modern democratic world where we were, we're exchanging things all across the continents, it was understood that if you were charging interest on a loan you gave to someone, it was supposed to be basically charity. And you're taking advantage of someone who's in a lesser condition than you, right? Can you imagine, like, if you were passing by someone on the street who's begging for money and you're like, here you go, but, that was kind of the view that the church had of it. But it is so much easier to say, no, you can't lend money with interest. It's so much easier to say, no, 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 than it is to teach people, don't take advantage of him, because it's so subjective in a way, right? Like if you and I had like a very transactional friendship, but you were having fun, would you even notice me taking advantage of you? I mean, like, it's so much easier to say, no, don't do that to somebody than it is treat somebody well and have their best intentions in mind. And in some ways, it's not natural to the idea of business where people get greedy. They want to make profits. Fast forward to today, can you imagine how different the world would be if in America, all these people that started up these massive Fortune 500 companies couldn't take out that first loan from a bank? Why? Because the bank didn't have money to loan because they weren't charging interest to anyone else. Okay. So basically the way that it's in its current form is no loan sharks. You and I can agree to that.
We can agree to that.
Yeah. But at a practical level, the church had we went a big 180 from no interest whatsoever to this is a moral good of the economy. Huge change. But in the eternal sense is care for one another, love for one another, understand their dignity. Now we have the vocab and the understanding and the maturity to do that. So there we go. There's 2 examples.
Awesome. So before we dive into the preface of your book, because we're coming up on that release, it's getting excited. I can see you're excited. Anytime I bring up the release date, I see you just light up. But before we dive into some pretty in-depth questions, I just want to know a little bit about your inspiration for this book. What was that thing that sparked your fire and your passion to say, hey, I want to write a book about this experience I've had. I want to try to help other people out. What was that spark? What was that moment?
Thank you. So what you find in the book is essentially a worksheet of all of the scripture and the theology that I had researched. One, to understand if I was doing the right thing. This is my form of discernment, discerning amidst a diocese that had no interest in me discerning. And so this whole book, which by the way is only about 140 pages, is an easy, relatable read. And it is my worksheet for how I explained to my parents, to my friends who are conservative traditional Catholics, that I believe I am following the will of God. The thing that sparked it, the final straw, was when I was at work in the US Senate and somebody grabbed me in the elevator and said, "Excuse me, are you Mr. Tilson?" And I was like, "Please don't call me that." But yes. And I pulled out my business card because I assumed he wanted to talk about his career. And when I sat down with him to have that career conversation, I found out that he was homeless. He was living out of his car. And I was like, whoa, go back to that. You're working in the US Senate. Yeah, you're not making a lot of money. None of us are. But why are you living out of your car? And I found out that he had been kicked out because of his sexuality. And he had kind of developed this idea that he had to go to Mass in Latin because he needed that. These are not his words. This is my reinterpretation. We said, because he needed that kind of extra credit. It reminded me of, again, the Pharisee that's standing at the altar thanking God for not making, again, the Pharisee, the one who is attached to the rules and the traditions, those are the ones that are trying. Those are the ones that are making the extra effort when it's hard. And it broke my heart because what he wasn't able to, at least in that moment, was understand that God loves him. Yes, he could say the words, "Jesus loves me." He said it. He didn't believe it. It was pro forma. And it was almost like, yeah, Jesus loves me because he has to. No, Jesus loves you because he does. And this book hopefully will give any reader the roadmap, even if it's not sexuality that they're struggling with, but the roadmap to understand that, yes, God, in fact, loves me because he wants to love me in my life, the life I was given, not the life that my parents want me to have, and the life that I was given.
I love it. Let's go ahead and dive into the preface of this book. I'm so excited. We've teased it a little bit on the show in past episodes, but I'm going to start with the very first words.
It's dramatic, man.
Of your preface, and I'm going to twist this into a question here.
People are like, "What is this?" when they read the first few.
It's crazy because we talk about on the show quite a bit how this is for Catholics that feel like they've been pushed out of the church. Your LGBT Catholics, your divorced Catholics, your remarried Catholics, whatever form of Catholic, non-Catholic you may be that are struggling with faith, this book is for you. But you open it up with World War II, and it's so dramatic, but I love it. But I just want to, for the first question I have for you in your preface, you mentioned World War II. You mentioned the 85 million deaths that occurred. Countries, cities, towns decimated. Dreams reduced to a memory. In times of personal, local, country, and world tragedy, we all tend to ask the same question: is God really among us? What was your goal for the reader to understand about life and the challenges we face by opening your book that way?
There's 2 things you have to know about me. And when I was writing this chapter, one, I am an international conflict major. And you can see that right away. 2, I wrote this after I had lost many friends recently at that point because I had gotten engaged. And I worked really, really hard in my personal life, understanding as a younger kid that I wasn't going to have a family of my own. I worked really hard to make sure that I had developed strong friendships with lots of people who were good Catholics that I could, they could walk with me on whatever my struggles are in life. And my support system largely came collapsing down in a matter of weeks. And the grief I felt, everyone thinks that World War II is something distant. It's not. Obviously, you can see the ways that the world is going right now with more and more wars breaking out. When somebody talks so casually about destruction happening in other people's lives, I point out to them, some of the homeless individuals on the streets in DC that I see every week, whistling to themselves, having conversations with the stoplights, drinking, overdosing on whatever in the streets of DC. A lot of them were veterans. And you're really never that far off in history from that being your future. Okay. And so this sort of destruction that the world faces, it's usually not until your life is literally rubbles that you start to question all the things that you had taken for granted. And you can find this in the church over and over again. I don't need to belabor the point, but I mean, The Pillar had an article maybe a week ago that I thought was a really good example, because in 1755, this Catholic community, Lisbon, Portugal was like the shining star of the Catholic world in a Protestant era. They were still Catholic, they were still devout, they were trying harder than everyone else. They were all at mass, they were celebrating the saints. They were the Catholics that you could aspire to be like if you could just try as hard as them. And on All Saints' Day in 1755, while everyone at the city was at mass, a giant earthquake happened, and all of these churches collapsed in on the masses. And this symbol, that internally they had understood their Catholic faith to be what had protected them, what had made them so strong. Well, now it's their grave, their literal grave. Most people, not most, quite a few people left the faith in that moment. Quite a few people left the faith after World War II because their bishop had described it to them as a holy war in France. And then turns out that neighboring Germany, the Catholic bishops were also saying the same thing. How is that possible? How is it possible that if two bishops are able to speak for God and they're both sending their parishioners to fight after one another, it doesn't work? And so we had to be really honest. And by starting with this rubble in the very beginning of the preface, I want people to know that the rubble is not far off in your own life, and that's where you'll discover God.
You mentioned the first step to understanding good theology is to set down preconceived notions, to look at reality first, and then see how their thoughts fit. In a world of mass media and online communities, why is this message so important today for society and the church?
The way that you worded that question is very much how Pope Leo, the current Pope Leo, words it. He is very much focused on helping people find God in a world of AI. I'm still thinking about the theological landscape where we have made relationships with one another optional. Okay. Never before in history have people been able to live apart. We don't have generational homes as much as we used to, right? You can have your own home. Okay. You can live by yourself. You can have a dog instead of a family.
Not in this area.
You can, by the way, these are not bad things, but we have, because of how advanced our society and culture is, we are able to make those person-to-person relationships optional and instead replace it with a screen. And as the ingredients of nature, God created us, you are an ingredient in nature. As the ingredients, which are not currently being mixed up as they have been in every other century, it is increasingly difficult to see God in the world, because all you have for human-to-human interaction, it's possible that all you have is yourself. And if you reflect back just a tiny piece of God and his divinity, because you're made in the image of God, if you're reflecting back just a tiny piece of that, and we're living in a world of, it's like a shattered mirror, you have to put all these pieces together if you want to see the fuller picture of God. So that's where I was going with that.
You say that this book is for Catholics and former Catholics who are suffering in trying to reconcile who they are with their desire to exist in God's love. For a lot of Catholics, especially former Catholics, the idea of a new day for them to be authentic before God may seem really hard based out on that same lived experience that we've mentioned before. How do you see this book being that tool to usher in this new day for them?
For the Catholic, it is not by our own power that we come to live good lives. It's not about the me. It's about allowing the Holy Spirit to help us live our responsibilities amidst all of the very complex ways that we were created. If we are really, really craving that type of Catholicism that's in a simpler time, in a simpler world, on the surface it looks more traditional, but maybe what people are craving is simpler. If there's only one or two ways of doing anything in the world, either you become married and you have a lot of kids, or you become a priest, then it really becomes about you and less about God. It becomes about, do you have the discipline to do your duty? Do you have the willpower to overcome things on your own? Are you masculine enough is often what it comes down to. Or for ladies, are you feminine enough? But that's not serious discernment. Discernment is about looking at all of the ways that you specifically were created. And it's about taking your first several steps on that messy, messy, messy lifelong journey of becoming everything that you were made for, specifically you. That's the definition of holiness that this uses. It's not like we've talked about this light switch on and off position. No, it's a very messy path. I'm talking to former Catholics too, because I want them to understand that even if you are no longer in the church, that theology can still speak to you, and it can honor all of the negative and positive experiences that you have had in the church, even if all the Catholics themselves around you just want to spank you into shape. Theology is still able to speak to you even if you're not in the church. And I certainly want to help people, even if you're never coming back, even if you're like, that is not safe for me to go in that church again. Hey, there's a lot of people who feel like it's unsafe to go back. I don't want to force you to go back. I just want you to have the tools to understand that you are wonderful, made in the image of God, and that you are not a mistake. And from that starting point, even if you are outside of the church, you can still take part in this walk together with us.
So you mentioned discernment, and it's a topic that every Catholic hears. We're told to discern our vocation, discern a job, me last week. But you mentioned the church is discerning, learning and discovering from these stories that they're hearing from their parishioners, that they're hearing from the church. You've talked with bishops and theologians from all over the world. What's your take on the church's discernment on when it comes to not just LGBT churchgoers, but same-sex couples, divorced couples, remarried couples?
Oh boy.
It's a loaded question.
It's a good question. When I talk to and listen to bishops from around the world, their starting point is usually whatever is going on in their diocese. You know how here in this area where like everything is about abortion? At least it feels that way sometimes from the pulpit. And then you listen to, I was sitting on a plane from Rome to Washington, D.C., and I happened to be sitting next to a bishop from Togo in Africa. His village doesn't have electricity. Okay. So there's a lot of inconveniences that his parishioners deal with every single day, and they don't even realize it's inconvenient because they've never had something different. And to him, it's AIDS all the time. It's HIV/AIDS. That is the moral problem of the day to overcome. And he'll listen to the American bishops and they'll be like, it's about abortion. And he'll be like, abortion is wrong. I agree. Why are we talking about it? Why are we talking about it? Because this has no implication on my diocese as a problem at large. Our ability to grasp theology, and remember this, the definition of theology is reality. It's nothing else. It's not a set of rules. It's not a tablet. It's not a football that you run down the field for a touchdown. It is reality. Okay. So our ability to grasp that reality, which is theology, will be determined by our lived experience. So we've been saying this for a long time now. What's that phrase that we always say? Tell your stories. Yes. Okay. Hopefully you understand why. Because the church is constantly balancing out its teaching. Okay. An example that I give in the book, I won't go too much in depth here, but the sin of suicide. It's a grave, sad sin. But we used to just talk about it only as a sin and not as a problem for the community to discern. Why are our youth in such despair? Okay. Now that we understand, because enough people have told their stories and enough people's stories have been silenced, we understand that we have to balance out the way that we're teaching this eternal truth in a way that looks at the greater truth. So that's what I mean by the church is discerning. In the book, by the way, I give 3 specific ways, 3 explicit ways that I believe the church will develop. I don't say evolve, I say develop, because it's not a Pokemon, on the teaching of human sexuality in light of what we know about human dignity and how much better we understand the ingredients of nature, meaning mankind. And I even believe that one of these 3 explicit ways will happen in the next 15 years. So that's a little teaser because I'm super hopeful about where the church is going. But we're going to have some ugly moments in the meantime. And the way that we overcome that better and healthier is if you tell your stories.
So obviously there's been a development over the past several years that has really shaken the church community, whether it's good or bad. It is a big topic, not only in this book, but also in your life. Same-sex blessings. While they're only available in a few dioceses, mainly in Europe at the moment, as of this recording, who knows, maybe in 20, 30 years when people listen to this podcast, they're like, what are they talking about?
A ritualized blessing.
A ritualized blessing.
Yeah.
It's a hot topic worldwide, though. Does this action of the church reflect, in your opinion, the church finally opening her ears and listening to those stories and listening to the cries of her church?
Ooh, it depends on how much rubble we are going to experience in our lives. The less rubble you have, they say rebel. Rubble, yeah. Maybe you need some rebels too. The less rubble and destruction that you experience in your life, in your culture, the less likely you are to want to try something new. After World War II, every country in Europe experienced a slightly different pace of reconstruction, reconciling with the offenses they had caused and the offenses they had received. And at different paces, were willing to question their clergy, question their bishops and the teaching of the church. The culmination of that was Vatican II, right? I always say that the whole purpose of Vatican II, which was to like reconcile with the rubble, there was no rubble in the United States with the exception of Pearl Harbor. There was no rubble here. Washington, D.C., you don't walk around Washington, D.C. and they're like, they had to rebuild that after the war. And so the cause for Vatican II has not yet happened over here. And God willing, doesn't have to. But until we experience that, it's going to be really difficult for American Catholics to understand, hey, we have to find a way to envision and live out that church unity that other people have. The same-sex blessings, I guess I should mention, similar to Vatican II, I believe you had certain countries in Europe that were sticking their necks out. They're like, we know that this is not in the rules. We're going to try it anyway because we're convinced it's the right thing to do, and we've discerned what's right for our diocese and our country in this moment. Right now, you are seeing a lot of countries stick their necks out and do same-sex blessings that are ritualized against the rules. I'm thinking Germany. I'm thinking Switzerland. I'm thinking pretty soon France, parts of it. Argentina's getting closer, I should say. And then you have Belgium, where they have specialized permission from the Vatican to do a ritualized blessing. That's what you attended at my blessing. The only thing that actually changed, you said there have been changes in the church over the past years. The only thing that actually changed was the definition of a blessing. And it was like so close to sarcastic that most people totally totally miss how sarcastic this was. Let's go back to the example of someone begging for money on the street down the road by the 7-Eleven, right? He's got the sign and he says, "Please, sir, bless me." What is like your reaction? How would you like? Let's suppose that was a real encounter you had at that stoplight.
I mean, honestly, I would offer to pray with them, and my prayer intention would be for their intention, whatever that may be. I would offer that.
If that's a very genuine response, by the way, and I should note that I encounter a lot more Catholics than you would expect with genuine responses on this. So let's say that he's asked you for a blessing, and what kind of questions you ask him beforehand? You've already established here that you're going to have a person-to-person conversation. What kind of questions you ask him?
So I go back to my formation with the Franciscans when this happened quite a bit. I want to get to know the person. Like, I want to give them a sense of human dignity back. When you're homeless or unhoused and you're down and you're out and you feel like society isn't there for you anymore, any shred of human dignity you can give back is a blessing. And I want to know their name. I want to know where they're from. I want to know about their family. I want to know about things that put a smile on their face, things that make them want to continue every day, regardless of how bad their situation is. And it's like you mentioned, we're never too far away from that example of a veteran being homeless on the street, having a conversation with a stoplight, or overdosing on whatever. History's never too far away from that happening to anyone. So it's always good to not just give dignity back to people, but also learn a lesson from them as well. Because a lot of times these people just had a bad break of luck. So to give them that dignity back, to say hello. That's why I try to tell people, if you're on the streets, you're walking by and a homeless person asks you for change, don't ignore them. Say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have anything, but I hope you have, hope you have a good rest of your day." Or if you want to help out and maybe you're a little unsettled about giving them just cash, offer to buy them a meal at McDonald's or whatever a restaurant around the corner is, and give them actual food and just have a light conversation with them. No one's asking you to become their best friend, but give them that shred of dignity by acknowledging their existence. So for me, I want to know their name. I want to know their, not their entire life story, but like I want to know about them so that when I do have that moment to pray for them in that moment and later on in my day, I'm going to offer that back up.
Theologically, that's beautiful reflection that you just gave, because we're supposing this man said, "Give me a blessing," and you're giving dignity, right? The other part of that is how it changes you. So in our homeless ministry in DC, there's a man who used to open for the Temptations, which is, like I would hear them on my parents' car when I was a kid. And I don't think I believed him at first, but then I found him on YouTube and I just started watching all these videos. I was like, why? How is this man homeless? He's so talented. He's performed. He's been in so many places. How is he not loaded? He had a stroke. And I realized in my own financial situation, in this economy, I am one stroke and about 3 paychecks, so a month and a half away from sharing his fate.
Yeah.
And in that moment, that is when I envisioned the rubble in my own life in this particular circumstance. Obviously, we all have our rubble moments. And it changed me. It changed me because I realized how fragile life is. The ingredients that God has given us, they are beautiful, but they are also fragile. And so the whole point of Fiducia Supplicans is not to endorse, not to throw money at somebody in a lesser situation. It's to encounter them. It's not even really to change the definition of a blessing as it is to say, you need to go do it. Because can you imagine if your reply, John, instead of like, I'm going to go talk with him, you were like, actually, I roll up the window and I speed off. Isn't that funny? That's kind of how the church acts right now, because this person-to-person relationship, it's so optional in our world. It used to never be optional to talk to the poor or the homeless. That was part of your Sunday duties. You couldn't ignore them. Now you have the option to ignore them. And instead, the church is saying, go bless them. Okay. Same thing with gay people. We exist. Despite the best efforts of the definitions of the church, we exist. Right now, I feel like I'm the beggar at the side of the street and people roll up the window and rush off. No more. No more, buddy. Bless me. Give me your blessing. And there's something so beautiful in that. So anyway, the book closes with a much more detailed explanation of this program in Belgium and what it's like. It helps you envision being in my place, standing at the altar with my already civilly married spouse, and we're begging God, give me this blessing. Church, walk with us. And that is the final chapter of the book before a very nice conclusion that wraps it all together. But
spoiler.
Yeah.
All right. So one of the main things we've talked about is your journey within the American church. And we've talked about the differences outside of the American church, outside of the English speaking church. And we know from our research on this podcast that we do have a lot of international listeners who may be interested in reading your book as well. So to them, they may not be as familiar with the American church. As we know, the Catholic Church in America has really been through it all. We've had history of intense anti-Catholic rhetoric over the past century.
Yes.
We have a lot of misunderstandings of our faith from non-Catholics.
Yes.
We have a growing legalistic view in the church that has kind of formed theology in the American church. So it may be hard for the global church or our global listeners or readers to understand the chaotic dynamics of the church in America. What should be the main takeaway for your international audience when reading your book that is so deeply rooted in your lived experience of the American Catholic Church?
Okay. Dear international audience, do you know what Cheese Whiz is?
Oh my gosh. I love this. I love this already.
Can you describe what Cheese Whiz is?
Cheese Whiz is probably one of the most unhealthiest things America has ever created. If you remember the Goofy movie, The Leaning Tower of Cheesa, I just dated myself there a little bit. But is it even classified real cheese? I don't know.
I don't know.
It's a pressurized can that a cheese-like substance comes out of when you squeeze the nozzle.
Okay. Dear Europeans, the country that created pressurized cheese in a can that you spray like silly string.
Ultra processed.
Our religion is very, very similar. We've overprocessed it. We've added some chemicals and ingredients that weren't from nature.
They were from a lab,
but they made sense because of the situations and the scenarios that our church was facing that maybe you didn't have to face. Okay. Now, dear American friends, when I was getting ready for, we had permission to be in this special ritualized ceremony in Belgium, the archdiocese was like, I can't do a Flemish accent. Sorry. I wish I could, like the Italian accent.
That's a tough language.
It is. But they were like, oh, invite your priest friends from Virginia. And I was like, no. Why not? Well, you see, I guess I should say, in my personal opinion, / there are allegations of couples who have adopted not even being allowed to have their child baptized in the Catholic Church for fear that they not be raised in the Catholic faith. And then the response was, you cannot prohibit baptism. It is prohibited to prohibit.
I love that.
Willie, by the way, who is the person who first conceived many, many, many years ago, these blessings. And I think it was a dream for him, right? He was trying to see, like, this is how God created me. Now, how do I ask my church to walk with me? There was some rubble in his life, and there was some pretty serious rubble in the Flemish church as well, which is those 5 dioceses in Belgium. I've already asked him if he'll come on the show as a guest sometime soon because he'd be really fun. But he is the one that said, it is prohibited to prohibit. That's where we're at. Belgium, Europe, Africa, Latin America, Asia Church. I don't know you, but if you're like everyone else, you look at the person and you're like, this is how God made them. What do I do with that? Okay. If you're in America and some other English-speaking countries, you look at them and you're like, that doesn't exist because the rule book doesn't say so. Okay, we have some work to do, and it's not going to be, we should run from the extremes, and we should understand how the church needs the discipline and the over processization cheese whiz that we have to offer the universal church in the United States. And at the same time, we have to learn from the Europeans and the Latin Americans who have a much more credible and, quite frankly, even difficult understanding of what it means to be holy, because for most of them, it's a lifelong, messy path. So that's it, man.
I know I, for one, and first, before I close, Dan, I want to thank you for inviting me to be a part of this journey, playing a small role here on the podcast with you to share your lived experience within the church that we both so deeply love and love to be a part of and want to see the best for going forward. I have always looked up to your ambition and your drive, and also your ability to write. I'm very jealous of your ability to write, because I would love to be able to write the way you do, because you deliver a message that is so easy to understand. And I think in a world that is very complex and confusing, this is coming out at the right time. So I want to thank you for dedicating your time over the past several years to be vulnerable with our listeners and our readers that are coming out for your book, to share that experience, because I think the impact is going to be absolutely massive. And I pray that this gets into the hands of everyone who needs it. And again, this book is available for pre-order currently, Amazon.com and on theologyfortheunwanted.com. So if you want to pre-order after listening to this show, by all means, I invite you to pre-order. Dan invites you to pre-order. It's his book, but I'm going to speak on behalf of him here. But Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure deep diving into this book. We just touched the surface here, folks. Just the surface of the book. Actually, this is called the preface. The preface of the book is what we touched on. Dan, thank you for sharing your story. I'm going to throw it back to you for your closing, because you do the closing oh so well here on the show, talking about wanting to share your story. So I'm going to throw it back to you to wrap this episode up with that nice little bow on top and talk about what's coming up next.
Life is messy. Embrace it. Understand that God made each of us unique. And if the church doesn't bother to get to know you, then there is something about the created image of God that we are missing out on. It's like a beautiful mosaic. So that's why I say tell your stories. And I hope that this book is going to be a really good tool for all of you. And until then, reach out on the website, share your stories if no one else will listen to you. John and I will. We're thrilled to do it every week. P.S. John and I are working on the book launch. We're super excited for it, but it's also a lot of work. So we'll be back in mid-December. Until then, hang on. Talk to you soon.